Okay.
All right, so we just finished talking about releases signed, getting the information we need to assess risk. You know, the other part of that, and again, I think the next thing you see here is a safety plan and a crisis support plan, which we'll get into in a minute. But there's a lot of information out there that suggests kind of different things about safety planning that say, you know, a safety contract really doesn't, it's not a binding kind of contract. It doesn't really do a whole lot to ensure safety. But I don't know that I believe that or not. I think the process of completing a safety plan in a contract and all the information that you're going to have, the family's going to address, ensures safety more than if you didn't do that, obviously. Usually a safety plan, we're looking at a person who is suicidal at some level. You know, it could be someone who's at risk to act out violently, if it's a child or something like that, someone like that. So when you're talking with a client and they bring up, or any course of the treatment, or during the assessment, because you would be asking about any past history of suicidal thought, any serious mental health, any current suicidal ideation or thought. If those kind of issues come up, either at assessment or in your ongoing sessions, then you would want to assess that ideation and see if there's any intent. That's what we talked about earlier when we talked about, you know, does the child have a detailed plan of what they're going to do? Does the adult have a plan of what they want to do to hurt themselves? I'm sorry, you guys still looking for that?
It's near the end.
Sorry, things did get out of order. But you know, do they have, you know, is there intent, is there opportunity for them to follow through on that? So, you know, that's kind of the first part, is just kind of assessing where is that person. Is it just someone that's overwhelmed and says, I'm going to end it today, I'm going to kill myself? Or is it someone that comes in that says, I've been thinking about this a lot. Actually, a friend of mine's brother just committed suicide. I just don't want to suffer anymore. You know, I just can't see being on this earth another day. It's very different than someone saying, oh, it's a long day, I just want to kill myself. You know, we have to establish with them what's going on. If it is a child, I think in any situation we pull the parents in, and so they're part of what's going on and part of that safety planning. I think for me, and we can open this up for discussion, but you know, folks who are in a situation where they would complete or attempt suicide are in a very desperate situation, a really deep level of despair that many of us probably never have gotten to that point, or really can't fully understand kind of where they're at. So I think, you know, when someone gets to that level of despair, you know, they're not thinking about the future, they're not thinking of it, they're thinking about ending it, getting themselves out of that pain. And to those clients, to those people, suicide seems like a reasonable option. So when we do have folks like that, we would want to assess, we would want to look at, like I said, we've got a sample safety plan here that we can use, and looking at warning signs, you know, are there thoughts, images, mood, behaviors that would indicate the crisis? You know, are there some ideas, you know, with that safety plan? What are some things they can do to get their mind off of that problem without contacting another person if there is a certain threat? People in social settings that provide a distraction. Again, we're just kind of going through different levels of things that can help us and help that client avoid that decision to hurt themselves or to act out violently. People that you can ask for help and actually have them write that down. If it's a child, the parents would be in there. They would certainly be part of that discussion. Professionals or agencies I can contact during a crisis. I think that's number 5, because we don't want to be the only or the first option for a client, unless we have to be. I mean, if it's an 18-year-old and unfortunately mom and dad were killed in a car accident 2 years ago, there's an aunt that he kind of knows, but she doesn't care for him. He's been through drug rehab. There's really no caseworker or anyone like that. Then we have to help them establish who those people are. We may be that first level at that point. Or we can also have, you know, the hotlines that folks can call and different things like that. So, but once you get to step 5, I mean, it could be that they have a psychiatrist. We want to involve their psychiatrist in this. Maybe their psychiatrist is someone. We would phone that psychiatrist after we had the release sign and let them know kind of what's going on. Is that person an option for you to call? You know, and at some point in there, of course, we would be an option. If it's overnight, most of our programs have an on-call system. I know at least family counseling does. So with family counseling, they can call that overnight on-call, and whoever answers can help them with that. The way that works is if Rashad's on call and somebody calls him and it's one of my clients, Rashad would get the information that he needs, and certainly if it was something where it seemed like an imminent risk, like right then, he would work on that. If it wasn't, then he would make sure that client was in a safe situation. He would call me and say, hey, one of your clients is calling, here's the number. I would call that person back and work them through that situation. If Rashad couldn't reach me for whatever reason, then he would call that person back and work them through that process. So as far as this is a sample safety plan that we've been using. I want us to come up with a better plan, but at this point, and when I say better, I don't like that the client's signature is written in at the bottom, the therapist's signature. That was added because that's an important piece of the contract. So that's something you can do as far as with safety. Now, a crisis support plan is a little bit different. This might be something that a parent would complete. This is what I'm going to do to provide encouragement or to step in. These are things that I can do. It could be a spouse that's completing this to say, and these are some things I'm going to do to give support during this crisis so it doesn't get to the point that the person follows through on hurting themselves or someone else. Those are just some examples there of things that we can do.
So now, our folks are not clinicians, so, I mean, they would definitely refer to the hotline. They're also not on call. So, I think they would probably be working with whoever their clinician was, which hopefully if they had reached this level, they have one. And they would also refer them to the hotline and be supportive, but not necessarily, and not be on call.
Absolutely, and I'm not sure in what situation you would, I mean, I not knowing your program that well, that you would even hear about safety. I mean, I guess does that come to the table quite a lot?
I wouldn't say a lot, but it does come to the table. I mean, discussing our clients' mental health is part of our job, and referring them to mental health resources is part of our job. And, sometimes those conversations can get heavy, and you can get suicidal ideation from somebody. So, we would need to know how to react in that situation if a client, made those comments and whatever to us. But it would just be, and I think even the crisis support plan or the safety plan would be a useful tool. It would just be a slightly different context for us because we're not clinicians.
Right, and I think the other thing with that, did you have something, Rashad?
Well, just thinking about that too. Generally speaking, because I think I could, really kind of understand a fear of, well, if I don't have the skill set necessarily, what might potentially happen. And so I think those 24-hour hotlines that are offered through 7 counties or Our Lady of Peace or the Brook, I mean, I think having access to those hotlines and allowing folks to, if there is that doubt or that concern, and allowing folks to make those calls, probably would be a pretty helpful resource as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think always PAL, our program that's part of our agency, they had a situation come up, and I think they initially went to Janie in intake and they were talking, and then they both came over to my office, and I wasn't sure what to do, and had some ideas, so we pulled Donnie in. So I think, don't forget the other programs too, you know, because they can always help. I mean, there's probably situations I find myself in that I'm not the expert that you guys would know. So it's like I need to see you all as a resource, helping me through those situations. And certainly with CAC, I mean, there's a lot of times it's like I'm not really sure how that's going to work. I'm not really sure, you know, and I'll get on the phone and call Becky, or I'll talk to Shannon, or just get a hold of someone to get a better idea of, you know, what we need to do. So there's also some information, this is for you to look at later if you want to, about contracting for safety. Again, whether or not folks believe it's helpful or not, I tend to believe the process is helpful. Anytime you have a client at risk of hurting themselves or someone else, as a therapist, I will say this, we need to be doing a safety plan with that person. And then when you do the incident report, which we'll talk about in a minute, that needs to be attached to the incident report.
I was just gonna say, as a clinician, and when I worked in North Carolina doing our agency there, you know, we had to do safety plans and whatnot. But I would tend to do more safety plans than not. If I had, you know, if I was kind of on edge about one way or another, just because I want to make sure that person's safe, but also I've got to think of my own licensure and what the ethics are behind it. And then if something does happen, then I lose my licensure, and then there goes my job and
Absolutely.
all the other stuff that goes with it.
Absolutely. So it's not just protecting yourself as a person or protecting the agency or the client, it's also protecting your own, you know.
Your liability.
Yeah, so good point, good point. Now I do believe, there's also some information in here about domestic violence and you know, why battered women stay with their partners. Again, that was just some information I thought might be helpful to you all as a one-page little printout, so feel free with that. I want to spend the rest of our time, hopefully our video camera will hold out, but the rest of our time talking about incident reports. Does each program that you all work in, there is a procedure for incident reports, correct, in each program? Okay. And I would think they're very similar as far as the forms that we use.
I would expect so. This looks familiar.
Okay. So there are a couple things we're going to talk about. One is an incident report, and one is a critical incident report. Best way to understand the difference between the two, a critical incident report is when something critical has happened. A client has completed suicide. It doesn't necessarily have to be on site. It could be you get a call that a client you're working with has completed suicide. A client has made a specific threat to a staff person, would be a critical incident. A client has made a specific threat to another person, or something violent or damaging has happened on site at one of our facilities. And it could also be, I mean, I've never done a critical incident report. There have been some done that I've been around, but it could also be if a staff person acted out towards a client or another staff person. Again, thank goodness that's never happened since I've been here, and I don't know that that's ever happened at all. But when we talk about an incident report, basically an incident report is when we're involved, or by being involved, we could also have heard that a situation happened. We might have a client call us that says, little Johnny was removed from the home today by DCS because of an allegation of abuse. That would be a situation we would do an incident report. If we have to make any kind of report on a client, we would have to do an incident report. you know, and there are other issues, if you kind of look, there are some instructions for completing the incident report, but there are also some definitions, which I'm not seeing right now. Basically, if you look at the actual incident report form, first of all, you would put the date of the incident, not when you necessarily heard about it, but the date of the incident. If it happened over the weekend and you met with the client on Tuesday and found out about it, the date of the incident would be over the week, whenever it was over the weekend, that Saturday. The time that the incident occurred, location of the incident. It could be that the incident occurred, you know, on site, that you found out this client was wanting to hurt themselves, you know, while they were at New Albany office or while they were at Shively office. It came out during session. And then what program you're from, you would complete. Name of the individual involved in the incident or accident, that would be the therapist, that would be the client, that would be any family members. It could be that you pulled another therapist in or a staff person in to help you with that situation, so it could be that person. So you would want to complete that information, who's involved. If it's a child, or heck, even if it's an adult, some important things to know are the age. So if you put the child's name, also put next to their name, their age. And we want to know, is this a 5-year-old? Is it a 14-year-old? Is it an 18-year-old? There might be different levels of what we need to do based on that. So those would be things that you would want to have. Anyone who witnessed it that wasn't involved, and that could be another staff person who was just there, you know. It could be the administrative assistant. She might have been a person that got some of the information. It could be a neighbor, you know, that witnessed the event. We would want to put that. So then you want to look at, after you complete that, what's the primary code? And that's where the incident report definitions, if you have that form, come into play. I mean, if it is abuse or neglect outside the agency, for instance, it happened outside, not during a home visit or not during, you know, but if it happens outside the agency, and then within the agency, alcohol or drugs on the premises might be a primary code. Injury to a client, we've had a lot of those, a few of those. Little kid comes in, he's sitting on a chair, the chair's got a little tack under it, he's going like this and cuts his finger. Something like that, we need to do an incident report on it. Make sure we do what we can to take care of that with the parent, but also do an incident. There needs to be, we want there to be a record of that. Then you may have other applicable codes. There might be a primary code, but then there could be something else going on. So you want to list all of those under the incident code itself.
On the codes, you're talking about like the definitions?
Right.
So like if it was abuse, neglect outside the agency, you put a 1?
Correct.
Okay, I was just
Yeah.
double checking.
So that's what you know, and if it was suicide risk or suicide threat, it'd be 15. You know, those kinds of things. On the next page of the incident report itself, if you do call law enforcement, we need to know the date and the time that you did that. If it was Monday at 8, the 28th at 8 a.m., that's what needs to be there. Who did you talk to? You always want to make sure. Sometimes we forget. Sometimes I forget. I'm in the midst of it. It's like I'm getting the information. I get off the phone. I'm like, I totally forgot to ask that person's name. If we can call them back, let's do that. If not, we can say general dispatch, you know, or something like that. But making sure we get who did we speak with, what was the police district if that's the case. If it's abuse, who was the hotline person that we spoke with. You know, I don't know, they're not always going to have a case number, but we certainly want to put who we spoke with. Workman's comp would be more, that would be something if someone got hurt on the job or something like that, we would need to look into that. So that's some of the information we would need. Then whoever is reporting this information would need to print their name and then sign their name. At some point, I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't instances where a therapist or a staff person can do this without contacting their supervisor. If it's a pretty garden variety kind of thing, which I hate to say that, but if it's a child who is, or a parent who said some abuse has occurred, we know what we need to do. We have to call DCS, we have to make a report, we have to talk to the family. So, but as soon as possible, you should be contacting your supervisor about that. And I can't say that enough. I said I would hammer that away. You know, don't be afraid, hey, I messed it up, hey, I didn't do it right, hey, I should be able to do this on my own. You know, at that point, it's about protecting that client and protecting our agency. I don't know any supervisors who would be angry if you call them to work through a situation like this. They might say, wow, I'm really frustrated today, there's a lot going on, but yes, I'm gonna help you with this, you know. So always, you know, involve your supervisor. The supervisor would get a copy of this, they would make their comments, they would print their name, they would sign their name. A supervisor would decide if there's a response plan that needs to be made. You know, a formal response plan. And I don't know if I have that in here or not, but that's something that a supervisor would decide. Do we need a formal response plan? Did we miss something? Do we need to follow up on something? Do we need to make sure they're more involved in this plan? Now, of course, on the incident report, you want to describe the incident in detail, including time, names, all the information that you have, everything that you reported. You know, you want it to be concise, but at the same time, it needs to capture all that information, and your follow-up plan. I don't know with all the other programs how they would look at that necessarily, but with family counseling, if you have a child who you did an incident report on because they were suicidal, then on that form you need to include, we'll have a session scheduled with family the next day. Within 24, at the most 48 hours, we want to have some direct contact with that situation again. And it's best, a lot of times people leave them kind of, it's like, well, they said they would call us. Not sure, you know, or refer to Wellstone, you know, client will contact us tonight, you know, if they're able to get there. Chances are if they referred them to Wellstone, you called Wellstone. So you can call and see, did they get to Wellstone? And then you can set an appointment for a day or 2 days later and say, if the child is in Wellstone, then we'll reschedule. But just to have that opportunity within 24 to 48 hours to follow up with the family. Sometimes folks say, well, I'll see them, and I've said it too, so hope I'm not stepping on toes, but and if I am, I'm stepping on mine too. Well, we have an appointment next week. When there's an incident report and appointment next week, again, depending on what it is, if somebody cuts their hand in the lobby, you don't need to follow up on that. But, you know, if it's a safety issue, we need to follow up within 48 hours, I would think. Any input on that or experience with doing incident reports here that you all would speak to? How often do you find yourself doing them? You said you haven't had to do one yet.
No, I might soon.
Yeah. If you have questions about them, contact your supervisor. If you're not sure, go ahead and do one. And that's how I feel. I mean, I'd rather hear my supervisor, I'd rather hear Donna say, well, John, gosh, you wasted a half an hour doing that. You really didn't need to, as opposed to, oh my gosh, John, you didn't do an incident report? You know, I would much rather have that first conversation. And incident reports seem to come in waves. At least that's how it seems to me. It's like I won't have one to sign for maybe 3 weeks, and then I'll have 7 that week. And I don't know what that is, if it's the full moon, if what it is, but it just seems like they kind of come through in waves.
One thing that was mentioned to me was that the age of the individuals involved is important to note on this first area.
Right, especially if it's a child. I mean, that's a good point as well. And I did actually, there is an incident report response plan, at least in my packet. You all may not have it, but that would just be something that, again, your supervisor and staff that completed it, if there is a need for a response plan. I've never done a response plan, and I guess if whatever's in the critical incident report doesn't cover what needs to be covered, then there might have to be a response plan. But again, if you find yourself in that situation, your supervisor would make the decision whether or not you needed to do a response plan.
Who is the, it says after completing this form, forward the copy, and it says program manager, chief operating officer, and CQI specialist. Who's the CQI specialist?
Well, the CQI specialist is Kathy Reed. Now, for you guys, is she yours, I know CAC does their own, but I would assume Kathy is your the person that you would need to send that to. But for us, for counseling, a copy would come to me, and a copy would go to Donna, and a copy would go to Kathy Reed. So, and in the age of scanning and all of that's going on, I mean, there are many different ways that these come in. The best way I've come up with to get it done quickly is to scan, for the supervisor to get the information and scan it over to those 3 people. You can knock it out with one, sometimes our scanners aren't working, sometimes the copiers aren't working, so we might have to do some different things. But that's probably the best way to do that. If your supervisor's off-site, which unfortunately for New Albany and at this point for West, although I'm just across the street, their acting supervisor is off-site. So when New Albany has a incident report, they complete their part and they scan it to me, or if I happen to be there, I'll go over it with them, and then we work on it that way. So, but those would be the 3 people that it would need to go to: your program director, actually in this case the vice president of operations, which is Donna, and to Kathy Reed. There's some instructions too on completing a critical incident response plan. You might have several copies of that. And then there's also an independent review of the critical incident that must happen. It's funny, yesterday I was getting ready to do this, and I contacted Donna and I said, hey, what's the process if we have a critical incident? She's like, you need to let me know immediately. And I emailed her back and said, Donna, it didn't happen, I was just getting ready for it. She's like, okay, so that was made very clear to me. I mean, if there is a critical incident that occurs, that needs to immediately be shared with your supervisor. Your supervisor should probably be involved in that. If you can't reach your supervisor, then you call their supervisor, you call the program director. And if you can't get in touch with the program director, then you would call Donna. But the point that was made clear to me is Donna needs to know immediately. If anyone else needs to know, she would share with Pam, and they would come up with a plan. But again, when you look at the instructions for completing that, critical response plan is used any incident that involves a threat of harm, actual harm, or serious injury or death of an FNC staff member, visitor, or client during the course of an agency service. Now, a critical incident report would not be used for a suicide threat, even though that's a threat. This is more if there is a imminent threat or action that occurs on site. To a staff member, visitor, or client. Unfortunately, the few that I've been around have been clients who have passed away, not on site. I don't think that's happened, but we'll get a call from the parent. We did have a very unfortunate situation. Still makes me almost cry, but we had a young therapist who was working in New Albany, and there was no indication that this was going to happen. There was no previous suicide ideation, but a young lady, I think she was 12 years old, they didn't call it suicide at the time, but it turned out she had killed herself. So a situation where someone actually completes a suicide immediately, we would certainly want to be there for the family, but we need to complete a critical incident response plan. You would have the client's name and their role and their age. Again, the codes, if you look through the instructions for completing that, if a client is assaulted and sustains injury, that would be 4. If a staff member is injured and that injury is in the sexual nature. So those are the actual harm. There are some, as you look through this, that are serious injury and death. So You would describe the incident. You would then, as a supervisor who's involved, describe the investigation statements from the individuals involved, and then any short-term actions that were taken. That needs to happen within 24 hours, 1 business day. This has to be completed. Again, you would let your supervisor know before that, but it has to, the actual paperwork has to be completed. And with a critical incident, I would say we need to stick to that. You know, I mean, if it's Saturday, you know, then you need to have it done by Sunday.
So the critical incident is different from the incident before
Right.
that. This is like for a more dangerous situation, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, much more dangerous situation, or someone did get injured, or a staff person was injured by, you know, another client. But if there's a threat of harm, actual harm, or serious injury, and that's, okay, what's serious injury? You know, I think if the staff, you know, I don't know, for lack of a better term, gets a severe paper cut, you know, obviously we're not gonna do a critical incident. But if that staff person falls down and injures their knee seriously, then, you know, I think the point is with these, to figure out for sure when a critical incident report needs to be done, unless it's the death of a client, that's pretty straightforward, is to talk with your supervisor about that, and figure out together. Once that is completed, there is also a review, independent review of that. And that review would be done by, I believe, Donna, at this point as vice president, someone from the safety committee, which I think we're still trying to kind of get that safety committee going again. And then the program manager and the staff person. And it could involve Pam at some point, but more than likely Donna, and I'm sure she would make Pam aware of the critical incident.
If the client died of natural causes and we just found out about it when the family contacted us to let us know, still do a critical incident report, but does it need to be reviewed if there's, or is any other kind of follow-up, because it was just, they passed for natural causes?
Well, I think anytime there's a critical incident report done, it should be reviewed.
Okay.
The review might be, gosh, this is unfortunate, the person had a history of, you know, but I think it's, again, we need to just be aware that those things have happened. In case, first of all, we just need to be aware of what's going on with the clients, but in case anything comes of that too. I mean, they may say a month later that, well, yeah, they had a heart attack, but you know what, it was Family and Children's fault because they pushed us to talk about our anxiety issues. You know, if we have a record of kind of what happened and we reviewed it, that helps us a little bit. Now, one issue I had once, I had a client that I hadn't worked with in like 6 months. It might have been a year. And I ran into his mom at Walmart, because that's where you run into people in Indiana, is at Walmart. Or the gas station. But, you know, she indicated that her son had passed away. He was an adult at the time, but, you know, obviously at that point, I'm not connected with that client. I didn't need to do any kind of response. I just said, I'm very sorry to hear that. Went on. Now, if it were a week after, you know, there might be some gray area there. But if there's a significant amount of time passes and they're no longer on our caseload.
It would be, I'm talking about an open case, because we did have somebody pass and we did a critical incident report on it, but I don't remember actually doing a critical incident response plan, honestly. And I mean, Donna and I discussed it and everything, but I'm kind of wondering if we really did it the way that it's outlined here. I'm not totally sure.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that may happen. I mean, that's why it's important, I think, that you communicate with your supervisor. Your supervisor may decide to do it a different way, may decide it doesn't go to that level. You know, at that point, you know, again, and if you disagree as a staff, at least I would say this about me, and I would say it to Donna, then you need to say, John, I really think this, you know, and I might say, you know what, you're right, let's go ahead and do one. Let's go ahead and follow this process. you know, but it may not be that it gets to that point. And, you know, suicidal ideation, that's a good example. It may not get to the point of an incident report. If it's just something that's mentioned and you follow through a little bit and it doesn't seem like there's really anything there, you might just do a really detailed progress note, you know, about that. Now, I'm probably always going to tell my staff to go ahead and do an incident report on that, but there are different ways, I guess, of looking at that.
Yeah, this was someone who had passed from complications of pneumonia and kidney failure, and his sister, it was an open case, we had seen him the previous month. His sister had called because she was concerned that she hadn't heard from him, because she lived in out of state, but she heard from him pretty regularly. So we went by, and he wasn't at his apartment, and his sister finally found him, he had passed away in the hospital. And so, you know, we did an incident report on that, and we kind of reviewed, but we didn't have like a response plan, or, I mean, it didn't really seem like there was a whole lot else to do other than to just, you know, be there for the family and clean out the apartment, put it in the case file and close out the case.
All right, just a few more things I actually want to go over, but before I do that, any questions, comments, observations? No, okay. We'll look at transporting clients. I know that some programs do that as part of their programming, transport clients. For instance, child welfare, they do some transporting of little ones to visits and those kinds of things. So there's two things I want to look at. If it's part of your job to transport your clients, then you'll have a process in place to transport your clients. You'll have the correct insurance. The agency, if you don't have the correct insurance, I believe the agency pays for that. If it's part of your job, they pay for that, increasing your insurance so you can do that. So that's one level. If you're able to transport clients, you should be aware that you can transport clients. That's part of your job. If you're not, then we do not transport clients, ever. Unless there's no other option and there's imminent risk and we've got to get that person across the street or whatever. After every other option, including Rashad paying for a cab for $50, is looked into, then, we can take a risk and transport that client if it is a absolute. Before you would do that, though, you get in touch with your supervisor or someone else. Again, maybe it's just Indiana. I'll be driving back from lunch, and my client that I'm supposed to meet with is walking down the street. And I think, gosh, it's hot. My air's on. I could pick this guy up and take him to the office. I can't do it. I've had clients even ask me, can you take me home? We're just down the street. Sorry, I can't do that. But it's just down the street. And I explained, it's not part of my job. If something were to happen while I was transporting you, well, I wouldn't sue you. It's just not something that we can do. So unless an emergency exists, that can't be taken care of any other way, we do not transport clients unless it's part of your job. Now, in the past, and we probably need to look at this because it would have been helpful the other day at Shively, not Rashad's fault at all, but it might be a good idea to have one person on site that is authorized and has the correct information and insurance to transport clients, in case something does come up. And I thought about that this morning, Rashad. I thought, well, goodness, I wonder if, I'm sure they weren't, because you would have thought of it, if the in-home workers were there on site that afternoon. I wonder if they could have taken that person home.
Yeah, I would wonder about some of the consents that we do in those, when
That's
we do
true.
have those in-home services and the
Right,
permissions.
'cause they're not our.
Right.
So I would say, no, we probably couldn't have done that. But if there's an emergency, it would be good that whoever's transporting that client at least has everything they need in place to be covered, in that situation. If we ever transport clients, they need to wear a seatbelt. It's not an option. If they won't, then they're not going with us. They cannot be under the influence or we can't suspect that they're under the influence. Every other option has to be looked at, unless, again, it's part of your job. And they can't be exhibiting any violent behavior. And those are situations we don't want to find ourselves in. If we don't have liability insurance, for sure we can't do it. For instance, I drove my truck today. All I have is, I think all I have on, what is that with insurance? Is liability, that covers you if you hurt someone else, right? So I would think most people have liability insurance.
I think
No
you have
fault,
to
this is
have
no
to,
fault.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Because I know I pay $95 every 6 months for my insurance on my truck, and, huh? Have you seen my truck? I'll show it to you later.
So John cannot transport
Yeah.
clients.
Yeah.
I cannot, and they would, I don't think they'd want to be transported in my truck, but, my other car maybe, but, and when the person to be transferred is a minor child and not under adult supervision, and/or without parental permission, which is where it comes in for, I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on the names of your,
Sonia, Melanie?
thank you. And there are other reasons, I guess, that we could refuse to transport. But the main point I want to make is, unless it's part of your program, we don't transfer clients. And if a staff person does, we need to make sure they're aware that that's not to happen. It's hard. It's hard. It's hard to, when it is 105 degrees outside and somebody has to walk 1.5 miles to get home. I mean, that'd be a no-show for me. I'm telling you that right now. If I had to walk, it's hard to let them do that. But that is, what needs to happen unless that's part of your role. The last part I want to. Do y'all have any questions about that? Do you think that sounds harsh?
I think it's probably for the best for our program. But we'd be a nonstop taxi.
You think it's hard?
service, but we're allowed to.
You like it?
Yeah, because
You don't want them up in your car?
well, I don't.
Yeah.
I had other jobs where I always transport clients, and there's always a risk between bed bugs that you can get in your car, and then you had to park in the sun to hopefully bake them out. Yeah, I like the idea of not transporting. It's the first job I had that we didn't have to, so I was like, okay, it's cool.
Yeah, I think some of the other programs judge us for not transporting clients. but
Judge away.
I know, that's how I feel about it too.
Yeah. Okay, and the next, there's currently, the safety policies for each site are going to be under review soon. And we're going to be changing some of those policies and, just kind of getting that back in order. In the meantime, there are policies that exist for each program and each site. I don't want to spend a lot of time going through each one of those because, again, a lot of those things are going to change. But most sites are aware of what their current safety policies are. Now, there are some things that we need to revisit, like there are panic buttons at Shively. And it's been some time since we've used those, and we're looking at currently, or need to be looking at soon, what the process on that is. Doesn't do a lot of good to have a panic button if you don't know. Now, New Albany has panic buttons underneath their desk. There is a system in place for that. And each site has their own safety and security policies that we will be revisiting. So for your information, there's some info that outlines those procedures. I want to talk maybe briefly about in-home work, because you mentioned something about bed bugs and different things like that. Now, how many of us do in-home work? Okay. And, I think you mentioned bed bugs. I got something from Jack McQuaid not too long ago says, do we need a policy on this? I'm not sure what the policies are on bed bugs, but I do know when you're going into a community, where you're going into a home, there's a different level of risk. You know, and I believe each program has their own procedures when it comes to managing that risk.
This might be.
I have seen, I've shadowed a case manager of ours who very wisely brings her own chair.
Yeah,
And she just sits down.
several of
It's
our
a
case
small chair, a
managers
little
do
triangle
that.
chair. She sits down right across from the client and process with them. I thought, that's genius while I'm on the couch. Like,
Yeah.
that's genius.
And that's a great idea. I mean, the only concern I had about that, and I've done that before too, because I went into a home once, and there's only been one or two, and I did sit on the couch, but I was worried about sitting on the couch.
Yeah.
The couch was moist.
Ooh.
When I sat on the couch. So, but anyway, I think it's because they had just sprayed Febreze all over the house before I got there. So anyway, that's why I think that was the situation. But I did, and I think it's good to have a chair with you, one of those fold-up chair, bag chairs, and explain to the client, oh goodness, well, I brought this because I didn't know if there'd be enough room, you know. But certainly we wouldn't say to them, oh, we didn't want to sit on your couch. You know, that's just part of.
Well, I think being honest is not a bad thing. You know, I'll say I'll go from house to house. I don't want to pass bad bugs on. It's a big issue right now. You understand?
that.
Yeah, I think honestly it's the best thing to go through.
They don't want them.
Yeah, no one wants them. No one wants to spread them.
Yeah. Yeah.
The thing I like about Amber's chair is it's really intrusive. It's like.
It's the tiny little thing. I want my bucket fit on it, but I'm going to get one.
You have to get the
I
double.
mean, another issue that comes up a lot is smoking. A lot of people smoke at their home. It's their home, you know. And I think different people have different views on that. I mean, if someone's going to sit there and chain smoke for the whole hour and a half I'm there, I may say, if they're sitting right next to me, do you mind, you know, maybe could you cut it out until I leave or something like that? But if they're sitting across the room, you know, my call might be to let them smoke. But I think it is okay to ask folks not to. The TV's on. I don't hear so well. That's why I talk so loud. But I can't concentrate on what's going on if the TV's blaring, you know, right next to me. And I will ask, hey, do you mind if we turn that off? And some people just turn it down. And I think, okay, that's their compromise. They need this TV on. Maybe they feel more comfortable with me in the home with the TV on. Maybe they just have the TV on all the time. You know, I don't know. But it's their home, so there's like this balance that takes place. But I think for us to be able to do our job, I think to say these are the conditions that need to be in place for us to complete our job. And most folks are understanding of that. I've even noticed if you're going to an area that maybe you're unfamiliar with, or it may not be the safest area, clients are usually pretty accommodating about that. Usually, not always. But clients will say, I've had clients say, oh, it's, you know, the meeting's over, and they'll walk with me out to the car, you know, if it's dark, you know, or something like that. Or we want them to be aware in most cases, depending on programming, that we're coming.
Yeah.
You know, we don't want to surprise folks. You know, I wouldn't want to be surprised at my home by somebody just popping in. We want to make sure we know where we're going. You know, it's unsafe sometimes in the neighborhoods we go in, but especially if we don't know where we're going. You know, and I would say that any neighborhood is unsafe if you're not familiar with it. I mean, that's my feeling. I mean, there's places around here, I'll take a walk sometimes up the street and back, and people are like, oh, you shouldn't do that. And I'm like, well, maybe I should, but I mean, you know, I feel safe with that. I mean, I don't think just because, you know, the area of town you're in, sure, you should be aware of, I guess, but, you know, unsafe things happen in all neighborhoods, you know, especially if you're unfamiliar with that neighborhood. And I've found most of the time, most of the people you run into are interested in helping you be safe.
Yeah, or just not aware of your surroundings, because there are bad elements everywhere.
Right, right. You know, locking your doors, you know, those kind of things on your vehicles when you're going in. You know, making sure if you do have to stop to grab something to drink or use a restroom or something like that, that you're aware of kind of who's around you, what's going on. And any time a staff feels unsafe, I know there are some differences, but doing whatever has to happen for that person to feel safe. If it's, oh my gosh, you get there and it feels unsafe, and the therapist has to say, oh my gosh, I forgot the paperwork that we needed to sign. I don't care if it, I mean, do whatever you have to say. I
Oh,
forgot
yeah.
the paperwork and you leave. Or, oh my goodness, I've got a call I need to take, you know, if you're in session or something like that, in office even, and you feel unsafe. And I think just doing whatever we need to do to be safe. So any other, do y'all have any ideas about,
Do we have a policy on dogs?
do we have a policy on dogs?
Because sometimes, you go to certain homes, they're pit bulls.
Okay, now pit bulls aren't always mean.
No,
But I see what
it's
you mean.
not. But, I work at Impact Plus, and we have a policy where if there's a dog, even small, big, we ask them to put them away.
We are able to do that. I don't know if we have a written policy on that, but that is
We
certainly
have people,
something.
we got big, even not small dogs.
Yeah,
And so, it's
I mean,
liability.
Rashad and I had a discussion about that not too long ago, about a smaller dog that I was
Mhm.
gonna do certain things to protect myself from, and he said I shouldn't do that, but, in.
Thick sock,
I didn't
thick
say
sock.
Yeah, just, but, it was a little dog, but a big dog, yeah, and I think, yeah, we certainly have a right to say, while we're in the home, because sometimes it's not even that I feel unsafe around dogs, but if you got 3 dogs yapping, in the middle of what you're trying to do with a family, it's hard to get anything accomplished. So I certainly think it's fine to ask folks to put their dog in another room or put them in whatever they need to do. And that's good information to have, and I don't know if we get that always at assessment, but do you have pets? Like to me, I'm a cat person. I wouldn't have them put up a cat because I like cats, but cats can hurt you too. And you might be allergic to cats or dogs. Which again, that's a difficult one, because even if they put them up, chances are you're still gonna, but there are options there. I mean, if it's a nice day, perhaps you can sit outside with the family and talk. But I do find that when we ask things that seem realistic, clients seem to respond okay to that.
And
You know,
weapons.
They might be like, well, you're afraid of my dog, but don't put their dog up, and
What about weapons?
weapons?
Yeah, like I've been in homes where there's maybe a shotgun in the corner.
Yeah, that's interesting, because in Indiana, again, almost everybody except me has a gun. So chances are, a lot of the home-based work I'm doing, there might be a gun up on a rack behind a mirror or something. But again, I think it's a situational kind of issue. I mean, you walk in and they got I don't even know the terminology, a Glock, I don't know. They have a gun laying right on the table in front of you, and there's bullets sitting next to it.
Incident report.
Yeah, it's probably, I don't even know if you
It says
ask.
register what? It's registered.
I mean, you can, I guess you could ask them to put the gun up, or maybe something where you just need to find a reason to remove yourself and then have that conversation away from.
Wash my
Right
Yeah.
now, right now.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah,
I need to wash my
yeah.
Now, what about, I can understand if there's maybe a lock on the gun. If it's locked on the gun, or the gun's put away into a specific cabinet, but usually if I see something like that, I ask them to put the guns away.
Yeah, I think,
I like it.
again, it's either asking them to do that, or if it's an unfamiliar kind of situation the first time, you may just want to remove yourself from that situation. Now, if there are kids in the home, which there would be, that's another issue. It might require some kind of report. If there's guns just all over the place, but if they're locked up in a cabinet, there's the family hunts and stuff like that. And even in that case, it's information we need to know, because if there is any suicidal or risk behavior, we know that there are guns in that home.
And if there are guns or drugs in a situation where especially a smaller child can get a hold of them, that is an incident report. Because we went to a training the other day where the person was like, it was a fair housing training, so it was very much like, don't report on your clients if you don't need to, and or a housing first. It's like this whole philosophy, don't report on your clients if you don't need to, don't, kind of like a don't pass judgment kind of thing, and harm reduction kind of stuff. And she kind of got into the territory of what should be reported. And so for clarity, I did tell the team, anybody who brought it up with me, drugs or guns, especially where children are involved, absolutely phone call CPS, incident report, period. Like, I don't care what she said. Yeah.
So, I mean, in all circumstances, guns, or just unsafe, I mean,
I mean, if they're locked up and everything,
Okay.
fine, but if they're out where a child could get them and there are not safety precautions in place, then that is definitely a call to CPS and an
Just had a
incident
4-year-old
report.
get shot at one.
What's that?
A 4-year-old just got shot last week, didn't they?
oh, yeah. I saw
Yeah.
I shot him.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Did he pass
I
away?
have no idea.
I think he's still in the hospital.
Is he?
Still critical.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, I mean, most people, could, if you walk in a home and there are guns, 2 or 3 or even one, laying around, I mean, that to me is odd. I mean, if I had a gun and I knew somebody was coming in my home
Mhm.
that was connected somewhat to maybe DCS or whoever, so, you know, I'd put that gun up.
Mhm.
So the fact that they didn't tells me, and even in, I joke about Indiana because I'm from southern Indiana, but, you know, even where I'm pretty sure 80% of the people in a population have guns, I rarely actually see them,
Right.
you know. I mean, they might be in a, you know, some kind of secure, closed, locked cabinet where you can look through and see them, you know. And again, they're probably hunters or something like that, but if somebody's, you know, got a gun just laying around, you know, that's not a good sign. And yeah, we would need to make a report. Okay, well, any other questions about what we talked about today, what we didn't talk about today? Anything that you thought you might get from this that, you know, I can follow up with folks on? I hope it wasn't too terribly boring. I appreciate the interaction. I think that makes things go by a lot better, and I think it's a good way to kind of get some feedback and kind of solidify what we're talking about. So, but anytime you have questions about safety issues or incident reports or managing risk, please talk to your supervisor. If your supervisor's not available or they're not sure, feel free to talk to the program director or you know, if you can't get a hold of your supervisor and you just want to throw something by me, give me a call. Be happy to help you out. Walk over to my office at admin, whatever, and we'll figure something out. Okay? Thanks a lot. Did everybody sign in?
Yes.